That was such a helpful refresher. And joining us now as we continue our coverage of the Synod is Archbishop William Lori of Baltimore. He's one of the U.S. delegates here at the Synod and also the Vice President of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you today. Thank you.
Now, you are here. You are actually replacing New York's Cardinal Timothy Dolan this year in the General Assembly at the Synod. Most members were here last October. Your experience is just this October. How has this month been for you so far?
Well, first of all, it's just the opposite. Cardinal Dolan replaced me last year, and he was very generous to do so. And however, on his way back from the Synod last year, he made it clear that since I was the one elected, I'm the one who should show up this year. For me, of course, it was a new experience. Many of the delegates, most of them, knew each other already. They had formed associations and friendships, and I was the new kid on the block. The process was also new to me. Mm-hmm. But actually, it didn't take long. Mm-hmm. I found myself meeting people I knew or people I'd never met, but whose company I began very quickly to enjoy. And the process itself is something that is not too hard to pick up.
One of the things that we've noticed this week is, especially with the release of the encyclical yesterday, Dilexit Nos, that it seems like there is an increasingly, especially at this synod, a clarity on what the Holy Father expects out of these synods, which is somewhat different than perhaps some groups want out of the synod. And so it sounds like there's going to be some disappointment, with some of the groups on the process or on the document. But what is your experience on what synodality is and what the Holy Father wants this to be?
From where I sit, I think the Holy Father has been very clear all along that the synodal process is not a vehicle to get this or that issue resolved in one's favor, whatever that might be. Rather, I think it's more about the interior culture, first of all, of the church, of one's heart, and how it is that we go about discerning God's will, listening to the Lord and to His Word and to the church and to our tradition, listening to one another, understanding what authentic aspirations are, and finding a way to bring all of the gifts, charisms, and offices in the life of the church together in a harmonious whole, to the extent that is possible in a post-lapsarian world. So I think that it is much more about that than about any one given individual issue. Now, there's obviously some people that there are always going to be some who might wish it would have pronounced on this or that. But I think the Holy Father wisely created the study groups to address those kinds of issues.
One of the things I think that I appreciate that very much, and I obviously fully agree with it. I think back home in the Archdiocese of Baltimore, back home in the United States, I think there is a certain cynicism, perhaps because how the media has treated the Holy Father, both in one way or the other, creating the idea that there's been ambiguities. So I think most Catholics either are expecting some shoe to drop, or they're just not engaged with this whole process. How is it in the Archdiocese, and how do we get more of the lay faithful in the United States to engage in this?
Sure. First of all, it is so important to look beyond the hype, to look beyond the sort of fog that is so often created when talking about the church, or for that matter, anything else that's kind of important. Important to recognize that what the Holy Father is addressing is really very important and will really have long-term, lasting consequences in the life of the Church. What the Holy Father is urging is that, in fact, there be a far wider engagement of the lay faithful with the ordained, with the consecrated, with those who have been gifted with various charisms in the day-to-day life of the Church. And I think in some ways he's trying to break down the silos that exist in the life of the Church. He's not denying the distinctiveness of vocations or the responsibilities that are attached to vocations, but he is saying that by relying on the Holy Spirit and by listening to the voice of Christ as it comes to us through the Church, that we ought to be able to talk through our differences. We ought to be able to establish relationships with each other, and we ought to be able to unite as much as is possible, given the fact that we're not fully redeemed, around the truth and around the mission of the Church. The Synod really is about mission because Jesus prayed, "May they be one so that the world may believe." I think that kind of culture change is hard to come by. It does not happen overnight. I think it has begun in many dioceses and many different places. It looks different around the world, as I've learned. But I would like to think that it has begun long since in the Archdiocese of Baltimore.
While we have you, I would love to ask you, you've been in Italy and Rome all month, but you were able to take a trip to Ukraine and you returned just days ago. What are you hearing from the faithful in Ukraine and what they are going through right now?
So I went to Ukraine for a second time, and I used our long weekend that we were given to be free at the Synod to go to Ukraine. I went to Kyiv and Lviv, and in both places I had the opportunity to talk and to listen to many people whose lives have been permanently impacted by the war, including many who lost their husbands or loved ones. I went to a place called Bucha, which is near Kyiv, and they have something called the Avenue of Death, where many innocent civilians were simply gunned down, as well as those men who were engaging in what I think we would call civilian defense. There was a mass grave in front of an Orthodox church. Subsequently, those bodies had been buried, but there was a memorial, and I prayed there. And only an hour later, I was doing the Knights of Columbus program, Coats for Kids, and I was giving coats to some of the children whose fathers had died and who were memorialized on that wall. That night, we had a dinner for about 40 widows and some mothers who lost their sons. And all I had to do was walk around the hall and just make myself available. And they told me their stories. And what you're hearing is a tremendous tale of suffering. What you're also seeing, though, is tremendous faith and resiliency among the Ukrainian people.
And the fact that you're able to hear their stories and share them with the rest of the church, that seems like that's synodality in action as well. Your Excellency, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Very glad to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. And our coverage continues right after this short break.